The morning I drove to my husband's hospital gala, I had a casserole dish on the passenger seat, and my 4-year-old daughter, Lily, in the back, wearing the little red dress she'd picked out herself because she wanted to look fancy for Daddy. I remember thinking how sweet that was. I remember thinking a lot of things that morning that turned out to be wrong. My husband, Fletcher, was the chief of surgery at Meridian Medical Center, the kind of man who looked good in every room he walked into, who shook hands firmly and smiled at exactly the right moment. We'd been married 6 years. I was 34. I had a degree in architectural design that I'd quietly shelved when Lily came along, and I spent most of my days doing freelance drafting work from our kitchen table, while Fletcher saved lives and attended charity dinners and came home smelling like the hospital, which I never minded because I was proud of him. Genuinely, truly proud. The gala that evening was to celebrate the completion of Meridian's new cardiac wing, a $42 million expansion that my father's construction company, Ashbridge Development, had built. My father had been the lead contractor. My older brother, Reed, had managed the project for 2 years. Our family had poured everything into that building. It had our name on the cornerstone, literally. The Fletcher knew that. Everyone at that hospital knew that. I hadn't planned to go. Fletcher had said it was a work thing, and that I'd be bored, and I'd believed him because I usually did. But my mother called that afternoon to say she and my father were going to swing by the venue and did I want to come and something. I don't know what. Some small nagging thing I'd been ignoring for months made me say yes. I called my mother back and told her we'd meet them there. I put Lily in her red dress. I picked up the casserole I'd made for Fletcher because he always forgot to eat at these events, and I drove to the Meridian Grand Ballroom, feeling like a good wife doing a sweet, spontaneous thing. The parking garage was full. I found a spot on the 3rd level and carried Lily down the stairs because she refused to take the elevator. She had a phase about elevators, and I walked into the lobby of the venue with a casserole dish, balanced against my hip and my daughter's hand in mine. There was a woman at the welcome table just inside the entrance, blonde, mid-20s, wearing a Meridian medical name badge. She smiled the way people smile when they're about to say something you won't like. "Welcome to the Meridian Cardiac Wing Gala. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm Fletcher Caldwell's wife," I said. "He's the chief of surgery. I'm not on the list, but I just wanted to drop something off for him." The woman's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. She glanced down at her tablet, then back up at me. "I'm sorry, ma'am, Mr. Dr. Caldwell left specific instructions that he wasn't to be interrupted this evening. He's in the middle of a very important dinner." I laughed a little. "I'm his wife. I made him food. I'll be 2 minutes." "I'm sorry," she said again. "I can't let unregistered guests through with Hama," Lily said, tugging my hand. "Is Daddy inside?" "Just a second, baby." I looked back at the woman. "Can you at least call him? Tell him Adele is here?" She hesitated. Then she picked up a small walkie-talkie, turned slightly away from me, and said something I couldn't fully hear. I waited. Lily tried to see past the velvet rope into the ballroom beyond, where I could hear music and the low murmur of 100 conversations. The woman turned back to me. Her expression had shifted into something I can only describe as carefully neutral. "Dr. Caldwell says he'll catch up with you at home," she said. "He's with a guest right now and the dinner is almost over." A guest. Not a colleague. Not a board member. A guest. I stood there for a moment. Lily looked up at me. She'd stopped trying to peer into the ballroom and was just watching my face the way children do when they're trying to read a situation they don't have words for yet. "Mama?" she said quietly. "It's okay," I told her. I set the casserole dish on the welcome table. "Can you make sure he gets this?" The woman nodded quickly, relieved. We walked back toward the elevator. Lily had apparently forgotten her objections to it, and I pressed the button and stared at the closed doors and tried to decide if I was overreacting. I was not overreacting. I knew that before the doors even opened. I knew it the way you know something you've been trying not to know for a long time. In the parking garage, I buckled Lily into her car seat and she asked if we were going home and I said yes. And she asked if Daddy was coming and I said not yet. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at my phone and did the thing I probably should have done 6 months ago, when I first noticed that Fletcher had started angling his phone screen away from me at dinner. I called my brother. Reed picked up on the second ring. He was already at the gala. I could hear the background noise. "Hey, you still coming?" he asked. "I was just turned away at the door," I said. "Fletcher told them not to let me in." A pause. Long enough that I knew Reed understood exactly what I was saying. "Where are you?" he said. "Parking garage. Level 3. "Stay there," he said. "Don't go anywhere," he called me back 11 minutes later. "He's at table 7, Reed said. His voice was very even, the way it gets when he's furious, but keeping it contained. "With a woman named Courtney Marsh. She's a pharmaceutical sales rep. He introduced her to Dr. Okafor as his plus one. I pressed my fingers against my eyes. Raid, I know. He brought her to the gala for the building our family built. I know, Adele. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat. I could see her in the rearview mirror, her head tilted to one side. Her little red dress rumpled. She'd wanted to look fancy for her daddy. Read, I said. Call Dad. You sure? He said. Call Dad, I said again, and tell him to call Roger Hensley. Roger Hensley was our family's attorney. He had been managing Ashbridge Development's legal affairs for 23 years. He was not a gentleman in a negotiation. I drove Lily home. I gave her a bath even though she was barely awake, because it was part of our routine and I needed the routine right then. I put her to bed and I sat in the kitchen and I did not cry, which surprised me. I thought I would cry. Instead, I felt something more like clarity. That cold, still feeling of finally seeing the full shape of something you'd been looking at sideways for too long. Fletcher came home at 11:15. He was still in his tuxedo and he smelled like wine and he set his keys on the hook by the door the way he always did. And then he walked into the kitchen and found me sitting at the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Hey, he said, careful. How was dinner? I asked. Good. Ran long. He opened the refrigerator, looked inside, closed it. You should have come. I tried, I said. He turned around. You left instructions at the welcome desk, I said, not to let me in. You told them you were with a guest. The silence that followed was a particular kind of silence. Not the silence of a man who didn't know what to say. The silence of a man calculating what he could still salvage. Adele, don't, I said. Please don't start with my name like that. It just wastes both of our time. He sat down across from me. He put his hands flat on the table. He was very good at looking reasonable. It was one of the things I'd loved about him once, that calm, measured demeanor. It served him well in surgery. It served him less well in this kitchen at 11:15 on a Thursday night. It isn't what you think, he said. Fletcher, I said. I know who Courtney Marsh is. I know you introduced her as your plus one to Philip Okafor. I know you've been angling your phone away from me at dinner for 6 months. So please, tell me specifically what part of this isn't what I think. He didn't answer. That answer was its own kind of answer. Okay, I said. I stood up. I picked up my cold cup of tea and poured it down the sink. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. In the morning, you should probably call your attorney. He stood up too, quickly. Adele, wait. Can we talk about this? We have Lily. We have a life. Whatever you think happened, it's not. It hasn't gone where you think it's gone. I made a mistake. I can fix it. I looked at him for a moment. You didn't make a mistake at the gala tonight, I said. You made a plan. You thought it through. You called ahead and told the staff to turn me away. You brought her there, to an event celebrating the building my family constructed. That's not a mistake, Fletcher. That's a choice. He didn't have anything to say to that. I went to the guest room. I lay on top of the covers fully dressed and stared at the ceiling, and at some point I must have slept because I woke up to Lily standing in the doorway at 6:30 in the morning, holding her stuffed rabbit and looking confused. Mama, why are you in here? I needed a different pillow, I told her. Come here. She climbed up and curled against me, and I held her and thought very carefully about the next several months of my life. I called my mother first, then Roger Hensley. Roger was at his desk by 8. He was 71 years old and had the energy of a man who genuinely loved conflict. Your father already called me last night, he told me. We've been waiting to hear from you. I want to know where we stand, I said. You stand well, Roger said. Better than Fletcher does, I can tell you that. Are you in the house? Yes. Good. Stay there. Don't move anything, don't delete anything, and don't have any conversations with him about asset division without me in the room. Can you do that? Yes, I said. And your brother tells me there's a pharmaceutical rep involved. Courtney Marsh. She was at the gala last night. Right. I could hear him writing something. We'll pull phone records through Discovery. That'll tell us how long. Has he given her anything? Gifts, money, access to accounts? I don't know yet. We'll find out, he said simply. Adele, here's what you need to understand. In this state, documented adultery affects the divorce proceedings. Not always dramatically, but it affects them. And given that your family's company was the primary contractor on a $42 million expansion at his hospital, an expansion that, I'd like to note, substantially enhanced the value of his professional reputation and his career. Your father and I have some thoughts about what fair compensation looks like. I didn't say anything. The groundbreaking, Roger continued, the ribbon cutting, the press coverage. All of that attached Fletcher's name to a project that your family built. That's leverage. We intend to use it. I sat with that for a moment. I just want out, I said. And I want Lily protected. Both of those things are achievable, Roger said. Probably more easily than you think. The next 3 weeks were the kind of weeks you don't talk about much afterward, because there's no good way to describe what it feels like to dismantle a life you built carefully. Fletcher moved to a hotel after the second day. Roger had advised me to stay in the house, and Fletcher's attorney apparently agreed, probably to avoid any accusation of abandonment on his part. Lily asked where Daddy was, and I said Daddy was staying somewhere else for a little while, and she accepted that with the quiet adaptability of small children who sense more than they're told. Fletcher, I later learned, had been seeing Courtney Marsh for almost 10 months. 10 months. Lily had just turned 3 when it started. I'd been finishing a freelance project, working long nights at the kitchen table, and Fletcher had apparently taken my distraction as an opening. That was the part I kept returning to in those first weeks. Not just the betrayal, but the timing. The specific, particular cruelty of the timing. My father didn't say much about it directly. That was his way. He showed up one Saturday morning with Reed and they fixed the gutters on the house that had needed fixing since October. And my father stood in my kitchen afterward and drank a cup of coffee and said, "You doing okay, sweetheart?" "I will be," I told him. He nodded. "Roger's got it handled." "I know. Your mother wants to take Lily for the weekend if you need some time. That would help," I said. He put his cup in the sink, rinsed it, and left it in the drying rack. "You know we're with you," he said, "whatever you need." That was all he said. It was enough. What Fletcher hadn't fully calculated, what I suspect he hadn't thought about at all because Fletcher was a brilliant surgeon and a terrible strategist, was what it meant to have my family's name on that cardiac wing. The building was done. The contract was completed. But Ashbridge Development's relationship with Meridian Medical was ongoing. My father had 3 follow-up proposals on the table. A planned outpatient facility on the east side, renovations to the existing ICU, and early design consultation for a future children's wing. Together, those projects represented somewhere in the range of $68 million in future work. Roger called the hospital's board attorney on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the board had quietly requested a meeting with my father. I wasn't in that meeting. I didn't ask to be. What I know is what Reed told me afterward, which is that my father walked in, shook hands with everyone, sat down, and said very simply that given the circumstances of his son-in-law's behavior, including the fact that Dr. Caldwell had used a family-funded gala event for a personal liaison, and had deliberately blocked the contractor's daughter from entering a building her family had constructed, he felt it was appropriate to revisit the terms of the ongoing relationship. He did not threaten anything. He did not make demands. He simply made clear that Ashbridge Development's continued investment in Meridian's expansion was contingent on a professional environment that respected appropriate boundaries. The board thanked him for his candor. 2 days later, Fletcher was asked to step back from the Cardiac Wing Dedication Committee. It was framed as a reorganization. Everyone understood what it was. Courtney Marsh's pharmaceutical company, meanwhile, had a primary distribution contract with Meridian that came up for renewal in the spring. Reed made a call to a colleague at another medical center. Nothing improper, just a conversation. And that colleague mentioned that Meridian might be worth approaching with a competing proposal. The contract went to renewal review 6 weeks early. I'm not going to pretend any of this was accidental. I'm also not going to pretend I felt guilty about it. When you introduce your girlfriend to your colleagues at the gala celebrating the building your wife's family built, when you call ahead to make sure your wife is turned away at the door with your 4-year-old daughter in her little red dress, you have made certain choices. And choices have consequences. That's the most basic thing. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. We had a settlement conference in Roger's office on a gray November afternoon. Fletcher looked tired. His attorney looked competent but slightly overwhelmed, which Roger later told me was the intended effect. Fletcher had retained someone good. Roger was simply better. The settlement gave me the house, primary physical custody of Lily with generous visitation for Fletcher, a maintenance agreement for 3 years while I rebuilt my professional practice, and a fair division of the retirement accounts. Fletcher's attorney pushed back on the maintenance. Roger produced documentation of the ways in which my career had been sidelined during the marriage to support Fletcher's. The conferences I hadn't attended, the partnership I'd turned down, the 3 years of kitchen table, freelancing while he advanced. The pushback stopped. There was no dramatic confrontation, no scene in a conference room. I sat at that table and I signed the papers, and I watched Fletcher sign them and I thought, 6 years, a daughter, a house with gutters that needed fixing. And it came down to a gray afternoon in a law office and a set of documents and 2 people who had run out of things to say to each other. He looked at me once near the end, not with hostility. With something that might have been regret or might have just been exhaustion. I didn't look away. I also didn't give him anything to hold on to. Lily asked about Daddy less after the first month. She settled into the rhythm of two houses the way children do. Pragmatically, with occasional grief and then back to the business of being 4 years old. Fletcher was a good father in the specific ways that he was capable of being a good father. I never said otherwise. I never said anything to her about what had happened, and I never will. That story is mine. She'll have her own understanding of it when she's old enough. What I will tell you, what I would tell anyone, is that the worst night was not the night in the parking garage. It wasn't the night Fletcher came home and I sat at the kitchen table with cold tea. It wasn't even the day I signed the papers. The worst night was 2 weeks after the gala, when Lily climbed into my bed at 2 in the morning because she'd had a bad dream, and she curled against me and said, "Mama, is our family still a family?" I held her tighter. "Yes," I told her. "We are absolutely still a family." And then I lay there in the dark with her breathing going slow and even against my shoulder, and I made myself a very specific promise that I was going to rebuild everything. My career, my confidence, my sense of my own life, and that I was going to do it in a way that she could see. Not for her, exactly. She didn't need to see me perform resilience, but I wanted to become someone who, when she was old enough to understand what had happened, she would look at and think. She handled that. She didn't fall apart. She figured it out. That's still the promise I'm keeping. I reopened my architectural design practice 8 months after the divorce, not freelancing from a kitchen table. An actual office, a small one, 2 rooms above a coffee shop on Garfield Street, my name on the door, and a business license and a printer that worked on the first try. My first project was a renovation for a family in our neighborhood who needed an addition. Nothing glamorous. But I drew the plans myself, and I sat in the meetings myself, and I watched the thing get built. And on the day they moved, the husband shook my hand and said his kids were going to grow up in that addition, and thanked me for the work. I drove home afterward and sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. Then I went in and made dinner. Heard the project wrapped. Good? Good, I wrote back. Dad says congrats. Mom says call her more. Tell Dad thanks. Tell Mom she's right. There are things I lost that I won't get back, I know that. 6 years. A version of the future I'd imagined. A trust that once broken doesn't reconstitute itself no matter how much you might want it to. I lost the particular comfort of believing I knew who I was married to. But here is what I know now that I didn't know the morning I drove to that gala with a casserole on the passenger seat. I know what I'm made of. I know how my family shows up. I know that my 4-year-old daughter, faced with a situation she didn't understand, looked at my face to figure out how to feel. And I know that what I gave her in that moment was steadiness, even when I had very little of it to spare. That's not nothing. In fact, I think it might be most of it. Lily started kindergarten last fall. On the first day, she wore a yellow backpack approximately the size of her torso and refused to let me carry it. And she walked into that school like she owned it, and I stood on the sidewalk and watched her go and thought, there she is. There is my whole heart, walking around in the world on her own. Fletcher and I are civil. Not warm, but civil. We text about pickup times and school events and whether Lily needs new sneakers. It works because we've both decided it has to work for her. That decision feels like the last good thing we did together. As for Courtney Marsh, I heard through Reed that things with her and Fletcher ended sometime last spring. I have no feelings about that one way or another. Whatever they had or didn't have is entirely their business. What's mine is mine. The office on Garfield Street, the house with the fixed gutters, the daughter in the yellow backpack. That's more than enough to be going on with.